this is HTV West. Now join Sue Carpenter for the ITN News.
The news from ITN.
Thatcher's dream for Europe, proud sovereign states, not unity. Lithuanian factories closed down. They say it's a total blockade. British lorry driver faces charges of illegally importing arms to Greece. And 7 years for the Baroness who swindled her aunt out of a fortune. Good evening. Mrs. Thatcher has made it clear that her aim for the European community is for 12 proud sovereign states, and not for the political unity which France and Germany want to see in place by 1993. The plan will dominate next week's special EC summit in Dublin. The Prime Minister made an unscheduled speech at a Conservative trade union conference today to reject it.
After mingling over lunch, Mrs. Thatcher made an impromptu conference speech. Overcoming the party's present problems was, she said, a simple matter of winning through.
And they're winning through because the policies that we're sticking to are right.
Among those policies, her stand on Europe. We're right about that too, she declared. That, as community foreign ministers prepared in Dublin today for next weekend's special summit on Eastern Europe. What's happening there, say the French and West Germans, their foreign ministers working ever more closely together, makes a United States of Europe, with member states giving up still more national sovereignty, even more vital. It's an idea Mrs. Thatcher loathes and will fight next weekend, as she made clear today, speaking as she was near the House of Commons.
We have the oldest parliament over there in Europe, 700 years old. And we're accountable to that. And we think the best European cooperation, the best Europe we can build, will be a Europe of 12 sovereign states sitting willingly and freely together. That is our dream. That is our aim. And I believe that that attitude will triumph.
To end, some marching orders from the boss ahead of the elections for local councils next month.
If you've got Conservative councils, keep them. If you've got Labour councils, get them out. Right.
Ladies and gentlemen, let us give 3 cheers for the Prime Minister. Hip, hip.
Party chairman Kenneth Baker led the cheering, but earlier he'd warned his party of a tough general election ahead.
The next election will be the toughest we've ever fought. In 1979, the country was in the doldrums. Now, in 1990, we are a fit nation again. 11 years of hard work have transformed this country. Because we are secure, some people feel they can risk voting for Labour again.
But despite Mr. Baker's warning, Mrs. Thatcher's message today was quite clear. No trimming or turning in the way I do things was the message to party members. Michael Brunson, ITN, Westminster.
More than half the people questioned in a new opinion poll want Mrs. Thatcher to leave office this year. A Harris poll in tomorrow's Observer finds 58% think Mrs. Thatcher should resign this year, 35% think she should carry on. But the Conservatives have narrowed the size of Labour's lead. Labour's now on 54%, down 3 points. The Conservatives are on 32%, up 3. Lithuania has shut down most of its factories, and thousands of workers face redundancy to cope with mounting economic sanctions from Moscow. Deputy Prime Minister Romualdas Ozala says the Kremlin is launching a total economic blockade on the republic. Tonight, the neighbouring Republic of Estonia pledged economic support for Lithuania.
The battle against Moscow is uniting the Baltic republics. Lithuania received a victory sword from its neighbour Estonia, and the beleaguered Lithuanians gave a rousing ovation to the president who leads them and the Estonian Prime Minister who told them we'll win together. Nearby, a small crowd gathered at the plant where print workers were beaten and evicted by troops. The soldiers left overnight. Printing is now back in the hands of the Communist Party. The standing of the Red Army in Lithuania is at its lowest ebb. The leadership is convinced Moscow's actions will backfire.
Greater political problems would be created for the Soviet Union itself by these steps.
Petrol is running out quickly as the blockade gathers pace. Milk churns are being put to better use. And ration books are back. One minister said the blockade was now total, affecting food supplies too.
Every day situation is getting worse, and population do experience the consequences of this.
Most factories are now on reduced production and the first layoffs have been reported. Thousands of workers face an idle future. For some, it hasn't sunk in. The student protest at the Red Army was light-hearted. Vilnius is calm, but it's not normality. Bill Neely, ITN, Moscow.
The European foreign ministers meeting in Dublin today expressed serious concern over the blockade. The Foreign Secretary, Douglas Hurd, said Lithuania should not be coerced, but too much had been achieved by the Soviet Union to be thrown away. The Lithuanian Prime Minister, who's in Copenhagen, has called on the European community for help. She said her country's desire for independence was a symbol of European nations' progress towards freedom and independence. The British lorry driver held in Greece for allegedly carrying components for Iraq's giant supergun is expected to be charged with illegally importing arms. Paul Ashwell will appear again before an examining magistrate tomorrow morning in the port of Patras. This report from Jeremy Thompson at ITN.
Paul Ashwell's lorry was stopped in the Greek port of Patras 10 days ago, just before the supergun affair came to light in Britain. He was told the problem was faulty documentation, but British Customs then alerted the Greek authorities that the 29-ton load of steel tubing formed part of a massive cannon en route to Iraq. Today, 26-year-old Mr. Ashwell from Northamptonshire appeared before a public prosecutor who ruled there was enough evidence for a case to be answered. The young driver protested his innocence.
No, all I was told it was a press. It's on the forms, it was a press, a forged press.
However, tomorrow he's expected to be charged with illegally importing weapons into Greece. If found guilty, he could face a prison sentence. The 18-feet-long cylinder has been identified by British Customs officers now in Greece as part of a long-range weapon, similar to the 8 tubes originally seized on Teesside. Defence experts are convinced they're right.
I think there's every indication that this is part of a super gun program. The problem is that it still doesn't give us sufficient information to know whether or not it's an artillery piece or, in fact, a space gun.
Already under fire is Trade Secretary Nicholas Ridley, as MPs call for an inquiry to clear suspicions of a government cover-up.
What we have had from Mr. Ridley is an inadequate and incomplete statement full of discrepancies which has failed to tell us the whole truth about the sequence of warnings that this government have had.
While the political row continues at home, a second British truck carrying steel tubes has now been detained in Turkey.
Here, 4 members of the family of the late Lady Margaret Illingworth are in prison tonight after a 9-week trial for swindling her out of more than £500,000. Lady Illingworth died penniless. Her relatives bought property, cars and jewellery with her money. Her niece, Baroness Susan de Stemple, got 7 years, and her ex-husband, Baron de Stemple, 4 years. The Baroness's daughter, Sophia Wilberforce, got 30 months, and her brother Marcus, 18 months. They're descendants of the anti-slavery campaigner, William Wilberforce.
It was Baroness Susan de Stemple who hatched the plot to rob her wealthy relative of all she possessed. Her aunt, Lady Margaret Illingworth, was 84 and suffering from senile dementia. The widow of a former cabinet minister, she'd accumulated money and art treasures worth up to £1 million. By contrast, the de Stemples had little wealth of their own and lived in a modest cottage near Worcester. The Baroness and her ex-husband, Baron Michael, invited the old lady to stay, and with the help of her